Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Well, it's more confusion comes out of Washington. You know, there's a fundamental principle of our jurisprudence that a person is presumed innocent unless he or she is proved guilty. You have to prove somebody guilty. So a prosecutor can't go out and say, well, I didn't find him innocent. You don't find people innocent. They're innocent at the beginning and at the end until they're proven otherwise. But today, Robert Mueller, or yesterday actually, gave a confused signal when he said, well, we know a president can't be indicted while he's in office, but we're not sure, we can't say that he's really innocent. I mean, you don't say that about things. And why didn't he pursue legal action? And so now the House Democrats are saying, well, what it is that Mueller threw the ball to us, and we're supposed to go find something. And the president has come out and said he didn't find anything, and we're clean. CBN's Jenna Browder has more.
Robert Mueller chose his words carefully in a well-crafted public statement, especially on the issue of obstruction.
Under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional.
Mueller walked through the highlights of the 450-page report, explaining that charging President Trump with obstructing the investigation was not going to happen from the outset, adding, though, that he did not exonerate the president.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
And that's where Mueller and his boss disagreed. After receiving Mueller's report, Attorney General Bill Barr determined the president had not committed obstruction. Mueller also reiterated that there was no evidence of a Trump campaign conspiracy with the Russians. But it was this statement that many Democrats and presidential candidates took as their cue to move forward with impeachment.
The Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing.
It falls to Congress to respond to the crimes, lies, and other wrongdoing of President Trump. We will do so.
Senator Kamala Harris saying what Mueller basically did was, quote, return an impeachment referral. Now it's up to Congress to hold this president accountable. We need to begin impeachment proceedings. And Senator Elizabeth Warren, one of the first to call for impeachment, quote, it's up to Congress to act. They should. Others, though, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, are urging caution.
You don't bring an impeachment unless you have all of the facts.
Mueller made it clear he doesn't want to appear before Congress and that the report is his testimony.
Beyond these few remarks, it is important that the office's written work speak for itself.
President Trump appearing undeterred and tweeting, quote, nothing changes from the Mueller report. There was insufficient evidence, and therefore, in our country, a person is innocent. And President Trump's attorney, Jay Sekulow, speaking to Fox News' Sean Hannity.
There's nothing that Robert Mueller said today that is any different than what was in that report. There was no conspiracy, no collusion. There is no obstruction.
And perhaps the point Mueller wants Americans to remember most is Russian interference in the 2016 election. That, he says, deserves all Americans' attention. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. Chief Political Analyst David Brody is joining us now from Washington. David, tell us about the White House response to Mueller's statement.
Well, a few things. It was a two-step process, Pat, from the White House. First, on Thursday, Sarah Sanders came out and said, look, there's nothing to see here. Mueller has packed his bags and gone home, and so should everybody else. And then the president this morning, before heading out to Colorado to give a commencement address at the Air Force Academy, had what we like to call here in Washington another extended pool spray, a little chance to have a few diatribes left and right, more right, if you know what I'm saying. And here's what he had to say about the Mueller report and what was left out.
Why didn't he investigate Strzok and Page and McCabe and Comey and all the lies, and Brennan and the lies, and Clapper and the lies to Congress, and all of the things that happened to start this investigation?
Indeed, the mantra, investigate the investigators. Where was all of that, Pat? And that's what the White House is concerned about specifically this morning.
Well, David, you believe that this actually is a huge win for the president. Could you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. I think first, there's so many things to unpack here. Let's start with this. There was no smoking gun. I mean, Robert Mueller, as Jay Sekulow just pointed out, I mean, he didn't say anything new. He said the report is my testimony, and he proved that in the press conference yesterday. And so when there's no smoking gun right there, that's a win for the president. But it goes beyond that. Look, Democrats at this point, they have a decision to make. As Shakespeare would say, to impeach or not to impeach. That is the question. And right now, with what Robert Mueller did yesterday, because there was no news necessarily, Democrats continue to be left with that decision. And look, Robert Mueller said, Pat, that he does not plan to testify. He doesn't want to do it. Well, that takes a spectacle, a media spectacle, a frenzy away from the Democrats. It's exactly what they want. Mueller said, I'm not going to give it to you. And so now Democrats are faced with a choice. Subpoena Mueller, get him in front of the cameras. At that point, they're going to look even more political than they already do at this point. And beyond that, what is Mueller going to do? He's going to sit there and pretty much read from the report. That's not going to look good for Democrats as well, either.
Well, David, as I see it, going for impeachment will tie up the Democrats between now and the election, and whatever policy they want to bring forth will be eclipsed by this investigation. What do you think on that?
I think you're absolutely right, Pat. Here's the issue, and Nancy Pelosi, I think, would pretty much agree with you. Basically, she is saying, hold off, let's just wait. But here's the problem that Nancy Pelosi has. She's kind of speaking out of both sides of her mouth. She's talking about how this president has abused the power of the presidency. Also, she's talking about the word, or she says the word cover up. And then at the same time, she says, well, you know what? I'm not quite sure I really want to go down the impeachment road. Well, if you believe the president abused the power of the presidency and you believe he was involved in a cover-up, morally, why are you not proceeding with impeachment? Well, we know the answer. It's politics. Shocking that politics comes from the swamp here in Washington. But this is what Nancy Pelosi is faced with. But I believe that that train may be leaving the station. It may be much harder now for Nancy Pelosi to hold off the impeachment proceedings. I will say this. Watch for Joe Biden. We have not yet heard specifically that he is calling for impeachment. He's kind of danced around it a little bit. And Bernie Sanders hasn't either. But Biden is the one to watch.
Well, do you have any predictions for 2020 as we get into that closer to the election?
You know, Pat, here's my prediction, and it's the only one I know is true. Trump wins unconventionally, and he'll lose unconventionally. That's what I believe. So, in other words, everybody talks about the economy in 2020 and how it's roaring and it's going great. Donald Trump even admitted in a speech the other day, he doesn't really want to talk. I mean, he wants to talk about the economy, but in a speech to 20,000 people at a rally in Alabama, he says it's boring. People don't want to hear that. Look, he has a chance to kind of lay out the whole case, but he goes off prompter. Have you heard? He's on Twitter quite frequently, and he is sometimes his own worst enemy. And so I think, indeed, if he has a real good shot at winning re-election just based on the economy and an incumbency and all of that. But I think if he's going to lose, he'll do it unconventionally. He'll trip up somehow, some way. But that would be my only prediction. And so basically, Pat, I have absolutely no clue.
Oh, that's the
and
kind
you can
of
quote me on that, Pat.
concise analysis we love to have. David, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Ladies
Pat.
and gentlemen, I agree with David. We don't really know for sure, but the statement was made during that other campaign when, another man won for the Democrats and said it's the economy, stupid. And I think it is the economy. And right now it's booming, and Trump needs to lay on that and stay off this other stuff. If we can get him to do that, he's a surefire winner in 2020, which is what Steve Rattner, by the way, said, and others are saying now. Well, in other news, as we showed you yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing new elections. Can you believe that? Chaos is going on in Europe. Chaos in the Middle East, our strongest ally, torn apart. And whatever plan Trump may have for a peace solution in Israel is now certainly been delayed a number of months. John Jessup has more on that.
Thanks, Pat. Israelis are heading back to the ballot box after Netanyahu failed to form a coalition government. Just minutes after before a midnight deadline, Israel's parliament voted to dissolve itself, preventing President Reuven Rivlin from choosing another party to try to form a new government. After 42 days of negotiations, Netanyahu couldn't bridge the divide between two of his leading coalition parties. The main contention was a law requiring some ultra-Orthodox men to serve in Israel's military. The new elections will be held in September. Well, more tornado touchdowns to report in the Midwest.
Radar is showing a tornado flying debris at this time.
Oh, my God. At least 2 twisters hit in northern Texas Wednesday, damaging homes and injuring at least 1 person. This after a massive mile-wide EF4 tornado with top winds of 170 miles an hour churned up cities and towns west of Kansas City Wednesday. With more than 500 tornadoes reported in the last 30 days, May is now the most active month of tornadoes in 8 years since 2011. Meanwhile, rivers in Oklahoma and Arkansas are overflowing their banks. Tulsa's mayor calling it the worst flooding in the state's history and telling those who live or work near the levees to relocate. This dam here, the last line of defense to prevent disastrous flooding from Oklahoma to Louisiana. 8 states on the Mississippi River are seeing the longest lasting floods in 90 years. The continuous rains making this, Pat, the worst flooding season since 1927.
Just imagine that, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine the suffering. You know, if God is angry with a country, he will, quote, strike their staff of bread. And this is the breadbasket of America. These farmers have got to get into their fields. They've got to begin to plant. And if they can't plant, they won't have a harvest. And if they don't have a harvest, then the prices of food are going to go up. So this is a crisis, especially for those that depend on the United States to export its grain and soybeans and wheat and oats and so forth to other countries. It's a tragedy of major proportions. And I might add that Operation Blessing is now on the ground in Dayton, Ohio, with where the tornadoes were reported Monday night. Teams are assessing damage, setting up a base of operations for volunteers to clean up debris. And interestingly enough, in the middle of all that flooding, water is a huge need. They need drinking water. And Operation Blessing's disaster response, along with the Hunger Strike Force, is bringing a truckload of water, disaster relief kits, hygiene, and other processed meals. So our mobile command center is also on its way, along with trucks carrying supplies and tools for volunteers. We want to be there to help people who are suffering. Now, I know my wife's favorite television program is probably called Jeopardy. It was has been a long-running show, and its host is a very popular man who was supposedly had death sentence. Now he says things are better. So let's see what John has about that.
Yeah, finally some good news to report here. Jeopardy host Alex Trebek giving an encouraging report on his fight against pancreatic cancer. A few weeks ago, he told fans about the diagnosis and his plan to fight the disease.
With the help of your prayers also, I plan to beat the low survival rate statistics for this disease.
The treatment is making a big difference, Trebek telling This Week's People magazine. The doctor said they hadn't seen this kind of positive result in their memory. Some of the tumors have already shrunk by more than 50%. I told the doctors this has to be more than just the chemo, and they agreed it could very well be an important part of this. I've got a lot of love out there headed in my direction and a lot of prayer, and I will never, ever minimize the value of that. Pat, a lot of his fans, this comes as good news, especially, as you just said, to Dee Dee.
Such a nice man, and he's been there for so many years. And Jeopardy, of course, with that new man, Holzhauer, who's close to setting the record. He's just an amazing, he's a sports bettor, and it's just amazing how he's taking episode after episode after episode, and he's across the $2 million mark, $2 million, $200,000 or $300,000. It's remarkable,
unbelievable.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But it's very encouraging to hear this news about.
I'm so glad about Alex Trebek. He's a very fine man, and we just our prayers go out to him along with those of thousands of others.